For millennia, people with disabilities were warehoused and ignored. They lived in people's basements or attics or back rooms, and people took care of Uncle so-and-so or Aunt so-and-so, but they were not gainfully employed. No one expected people with disabilities to be gainfully employed. The World War II veterans who founded this organization did not want that kind of a life. When people came home from war, or when people were disabled, congenitally or traumatically, there was not a community support system to keep them living well in the community. Organized groups of people with disabilities, including paralyzed veterans, made the need clear to government and expected government to respond.
As United Spinal built its reputation, the organization's mission was galvanized by a new leader, James J. Peters, a civil engineer and second lieutenant in the U.S. Army who was spinal cord injured in 1967. Peters exposed the harsh conditions facing paralyzed Vietnam veterans at the Bronx VA hospital in a Life magazine cover story. The report caused public outrage, which led the VA to begin to address the needs of paralyzed veterans. Within 10 years, the hospital was renovated and later named in honor of Peters.
Jim Peters cared about the person with a disability. If you had a disability, he'd try to find a job for you. He'd create a job for you if you didn't have one. If you came with a systemic problem, he'd call the staff together and try to change the systemic problem, and couldn't believe that you couldn't fix it. Once it was on his radar, you had to solve this problem. And many problems were solved that way because he just wouldn't take no for an answer.
With its roots in New York City, United Spinal began to focus on a variety of problems facing the disability community. It played an instrumental role in improving the city's mass transit systems and developed programs to make the built environment accessible to all.
New York City is our showroom. Frank Sinatra, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. What we've done here, many times the first time in the world, shows that it can be done anywhere. We took an old rail city and got them to agree to make transportation accessible. In 1979, we sued New York City Transit to make buses and subways accessible. No one agreed. The litigation went on for a few years. We got an injunction to stop subway station renovation unless they made them accessible. We did it. 50% of taxis had to be accessible by 2020, an agreement we made in 2014 that would change the face of transportation in New York City.
United Spinal was called upon to help draft portions of the Americans with Disabilities Act. This landmark civil rights law prohibits discrimination based upon disability.
If you ask me what's the most significant thing I've ever done, I would say participating in there's two. There's a tie. Participating in the drafting of the Americans with Disabilities Act, because I never dreamed of something like that. And getting New York City to agree to put lifts on buses. So I got involved with the national group that was lobbying for ADA, and it was an exquisite coming together of people who were of one mind about the needs and rights issues, and 22 months, start to finish, from concept to statute. I don't think I've ever done anything better or faster with greater people. And we're about to have the 30th anniversary.
United Spinal has used the ADA to not only advocate for improvements in transportation, employment, and accessibility, but to promote the integration of people with disabilities in all aspects of our society.
When United Spinal became United Spinal, when it decided to open its doors to everyone with spinal cord injury and disorder, we had to change our priorities. It was going to still represent disabled veterans, but it's also going to deal with disability policy nationally. It's also going to organize chapters around the country to deal with disability policy locally. And it's also going to speak directly to the community of manufacturers and vendors of equipment for people with disabilities. United Spinal Association sees as part of its mission developing the next generation of leadership. There was a core group of disability advocates that existed in the late 70s, early 80s that pushed the disability rights movement over the finish line if the finish line was the Americans with Disabilities Act. And there have been great leaps and bounds in promoting the rights of people with disabilities since the Americans with Disabilities Act, largely because it passed. But it is imperative to develop that next generation of leader.
United Spinal's initiatives have paved the way for future generations of people with disabilities to live with a greater quality of life and independence.